groan of the heavy doors on the CH-47 woke Evans up from his shallow slumber. Based on the flaming projectiles rocketing past the windows, he knew they were close. The hull of the aircraft shuddered as he watched the soldiers on board check and double-check their gear. It was the third meme war in about as many years. A war Evans would rather not have covered. But here he was, watching Agent Poso and his ragtag group of wife and child strap bandolas with rare paybees to their flak jackets. Forgive me, Robert. Robert, hey, Bill Mitchell. I'll be your handler once we hit the beach. Stick with me, and you'll taste the sweet smell of exercising your God-given First Amendment freedom of speech. Mitchell leaned his head back and clucked towards the ceiling of the helicopter. Evan's heart sunk into the bottom of his chest.
Should have stayed in fucking Iraq.
Evans muttered under his breath. Mitchell busied himself trying to load a large Spygate infographic into a giant bazooka. He wasn't having much success. Evans let out an audible sigh. He should have never taken the gig. Everyone warned him not to, but somebody was paying big money to make a 360-degree documentary of the Third Meme War. Evans had initially thought the job was a hoax, since memes are usually most effective in 2D. But after the first check cleared, he didn't ask any questions. Sometimes you take the job, sometimes you take the paycheck. Plus, the digital soldiers were up against a seemingly unstoppable, yet fascinating foe. They called them the Shadow Bands. The Shadow Bands had emerged from caverns deep within the earth around November of 2016. Large, amalgamous creatures set to transcend time and space. No one knew how many there were, or if they could be stopped at all. In 3 years, the best the digital soldiers could do was attempt to fire their memes past the creatures. With patience and good aim, they had a chance at hitting a normie and red-pilling them. Evans looked down at the small recorder in his hand. He pressed the small circular button and watched the levels begin to jump across the small orange screen. He extended his arm in Mitchell's direction.
So what is it you're hoping to accomplish here today?
Evans asked. Well, you see, I got all these Spygate posters, Epic Times, fantastic content. General Vandersteel needs these memes to go viral. Charlie Company's trying to get it trending on Twitter, and we'll be at the shores of Reddit in, He glanced at his wrist, although as far as Evans could tell, Mitchell wasn't wearing a watch. 1,800 hours. 1,800 hours, Mitchell quipped happily. He looked like a child who'd been told that he could pick out one. He looked like a child who had been told he could pick out one toy at Toys R Us.
Melting, crying, slamming the table, pathetic.
Evans watched as he stuffed a handful of NPC memes into his pockets. Just in case, Mitchell shouted. A giant explosion rocked the helicopter. Evans shielded his eyes as a blinding spout of light poured through the damaged hull. Soldiers shrieked as they were sucked out into the soft orange clouds. Evans gripped his recorder tight, eyes wide as he watched Agent Poso abandon his family and eject himself from the rear of the heli. "We've got to drop now!" Mitchell screamed before snorting a giant rail of cocaine off the back of his hand. He clipped a large metal hook through a tether on Evans' utility belt. And then, they were in the air. It was chaos. Smoldering projectiles zipped by them as they tumbled through the air. "See, it's a real war!" Mitchell called out as nearby soldiers, also in freefall, made high-speed contact with debris and shrapnel.
"What?"
screamed a perplexed Evans. Was this motherfucker really trying to argue some point as the pair hurtled towards a war zone on some godforsaken message board? Bill Mitchell was no longer paying attention to him. Instead, he held his phone out in the air, playing the Your Voice America theme song as loud as the volume would go. Evan's stomach heaved as the jolt from the parachute shook its way through his bones. He gripped the ropes tightly and watched as the ground rushed towards him at an alarming speed. The impact wasn't as bad as he had feared. The shock from the descent made it hard to process anything, really. All around him, soldiers were hurling themselves through the sands, firing off golden pepes. Automatic downvote fire ricocheted off the ground beneath him. A hand reached out and grabbed his shoulder and spun him around. It was Mitchell. He was screaming in Evans' face, but he couldn't hear a word. Mitchell's breath smelled like cocaine and goldfish crackers. Finally, his ears began to adjust, and the sounds of the battlefield came into focus. "Do you want some cocaine?" Mitchell yelled. But before Evans could answer, the sand beneath their feet began to quake. Waterfalls of sand poured into the ground under them, and a giant, shimmery creature on 6 legs scuttled to its feet, towering over the two men. Evans froze. "Shadow Man!" Mitchell yelled. A couple soldiers nearby concentrated poorly written complaints toward the monster. When a handful of them made contact, Evan watched as their petty, strawman arguments were absorbed directly into the monster's galactic-looking skin. Mitchell ran right towards the creature. "This is very unfair!" The creature immediately shredded Mitchell into 1,000 pieces. Evans stared at the blood-soaked sand where Mitchell was standing just a moment ago as the monster approached him, tentacles rippling. Then, blackness. The groan of the heavy doors on the CH-47 woke Evans up from his shallow slumber. This time he shot up and clutched his chest, fighting for quick, shallow breaths. The hull of the aircraft shuddered as he watched the soldiers on board check and double-check their gear. "You okay?" A familiar voice piped up. It was Mitchell, again struggling with the oversized Spygate infographic. Agent Poso and his ragtag group of wife and child again strapped bandolas with rare pepes to their flak jackets. Evans couldn't believe it. He was staring at this surprisingly handsome man with thick silvery hair who moments ago had just been turned to pulp right before his eyes. Evans looked down at the small recorder in his hand. He pressed the circular button and watched the levels begin to jump on the orange screen. He extended his arm in Mitchell's direction, again, his hand shaking a little.
So, Bill, are you afraid of dying today?
Evans asked. Bill stopped fiddling with the memes. He thought long and hard. "Let me tell you something. Look, here's the deal. At one point in my life, yes, I might have feared death. But son, believe me when I tell you that went away the day that Donald J. Trump, my president, was elected into office. He is an extra celestial angel who will ride down on a cloud of matter and carry my wounded soul directly into the arms of Jesus Christ himself, and I will sing with the angels and kings from now until eternity." Whoa! A giant explosion rocked the helicopter. Evans shielded his eyes again as a blinding spout of light poured in through the damaged hull. Soldiers shrieked as they were sucked out into the soft orange clouds. Evans gripped his recorder tight, eyes wide as he watched Agent Poso once again abandon his family and eject himself from the rear of the helicopter. It was all the same as before. The free fall, the parachute, the battlefield. Like a bad case of deja vu. Again, the shadow band emerged from the blood-soaked sands. Evans watched as Mitchell, once again, attempted to argue with the creature. Evans snapped to.
No, it kills you.
He shouted towards Mitchell. Instinctively, Evans sprang to his feet and hooked a hand under one of Mitchell's elbows, dragging him away from the creature, who had turned its focus on other nearby soldiers, trying to drop Moabs into our politics. Evans and Mitchell ducked behind the wreckage of a fallen craft. Much of the hull was still intact and made for some good cover. Mitchell seemed perturbed. "What are you doing? I was fully ready to sacrifice myself to the shadow band so that other conservative-minded thinkers would be able to post these very educational Epic Times infographics or even links to some of our most popular YVA episodes." Evans dug into his pocket and produced a crumpled pack of cigarettes. He pinched one in between his teeth and pulled it out of the package. Unable to find his lighter, Evans held the cigarette next to a smoldering piece of melting steel and puffed until the cherry glowed red. He exhaled deeply and glanced incredulously at Mitchell.
So what's the deal with that? The whole Falun Gong thing?
Mitchell smiled wide. Falun Gong is the deal. It's the deal for everything. Just then, a group of normies ran past the wreckage. Not noticing Mitchell, he sprang to his feet. Wait! He shouted. The three turned around, not sure what to make of this middle-aged limo driver-looking guy aiming a large bazooka directly at them. The original content streaked through the air and deployed a couple of inches from the normies, reflecting a soft blue glow off their stunned faces.
What the hell is this shit?
Yeah, of course our law enforcement agencies are corrupt, but the fact that these people think Trump's the solution fucking blows my mind.
This is a very informative graphic. The three wandered away, heading towards various subreddits. 1 out of 3 ain't bad, Mitchell shouted as he shimmied his shoulders at no one in particular. His nervous energy was giving Evans the fear. Come on, Mitchell yelled. We're not too far from the rally point. Camp Donald. We'll regroup there. Evans gathered himself slowly. Death by shadow band seemed preferable to spending any amount of time in the Donald, but with nowhere else to go, he began to reluctantly follow Bill off the beach. Come on, slowpoke. I'm 4 times your age and I'm moving way faster than you, Bill smirked. Evans blinked in a similar manner to a popular meme.
What are you, like 128?
He asked. Yes! Mitchell giggled, his face resembling a plastic jack-o'-lantern. Evans rolled his eyes.
Well, you're on a lot of cocaine.
Mitchell's eyes lit up. That reminds me, he squawked. He reached into one of the vest pockets and produced a rather large baggie of cocaine.
Oh, come on, man.
Lamented Evans, but it was no use. Mitchell leaned over. Mitchell...
Oh God, dude, his face exploded. He's gonna cry again.
I forgot that I wrote this part.
He's gonna cry again.
Mitchell leaned over and picked up a large seashell and used it to scoop a healthy portion of cocaine out of the bag. He then lifted the shell to his nose and inhaled deeply. At first, a look of pure ecstasy rushed across his face, but it quickly turned to horror. Mitchell clutched his chest. Too much cocaine. He collapsed face first into the sand, dead. Before Evans could even process what he'd witnessed, let alone comprehend that he'd also recorded it, all of it, in 360 degrees. A small platoon was on him.
Hey, this guy killed Captain Bill!
Hey, hands where I can see him! Evans calmly tried to explain to the frightened soldiers what had happened.
Look, guys, I didn't touch him at all. He overdosed on drugs. Check his pockets.
But the guys weren't even listening. They had their rifles raised, their trigger fingers shaking. Come on, Chad, let's dox this fool, man. He killed Bill.
Fine, let's waste him.
The gunshots seemed to echo off into eternity. Then, blackness. The groan of the heavy doors on the CH-47 woke Evans up from his shallow slumber. The hull of the aircraft shuddered as he watched the soldiers on board check and double-check their gear. You okay? A familiar voice piped up. It was Mitchell, again, struggling with the oversized Spygate infographic. Evans' mind raced. His eyes darted around the hull of the CH-47. Again, he watched as Agent Poso asked his wife to take a picture of him holding a gun. Before Evans realized it, he was shouting above the roar of the churning rotors.
We gotta abort. We're about to get hit.
Mitchell and Poso looked at him like he was crazy. Evans decided to go for broke.
Look, I'm living this day over and over again. At first I thought maybe it was a dream or some shit, but it's not. It's exactly like Groundhog Day.
The holiday? Asked Bill Mitchell. Evans looked exasperated.
No, the Bill Murray movie. Have you not seen it?
All three shook their heads no. Evans reeled.
What about Edge of Tomorrow with Tom Cruise? Have you seen that?
All three nodded excitedly, muttering praises of the film and Cruise's natural knack for comedy. Boom! A giant explosion rocked the helicopter. Evans shielded his eyes as a blinding spout of light poured in through the damaged hull. Soldiers shrieked as they were sucked out into the clouds. Evans gripped his recorder tight as he watched Agent Poso abandon his family a third time and eject himself from the rear of the helicopter. Everything was the same, but different. This time, Evans moved with ease. With one hand on the camera and one planted firmly on Mitchell's shoulder, he guided them past the roving shadow bands and armies of bots armed to the teeth with Russian propaganda. It was the perfect take. After some time, Mitchell and Evans arrived at Camp _Donald. Evans immediately noticed the three young soldiers who'd murdered him just moments ago. They were quietly stacking boxes of ammunition with Sunday Gunday pictures and build-a-wall memes. Mitchell was yammering on excitedly. So you see, the Falun Gong religion, the human soul can actually, and I know this sounds unbelievable, but I've seen it. It can travel back in time and inhabit the consciousness of its past self, a sort of a cosmic loophole, if you will. Evans slumped down next to a pile of coats and bricks and lit up a cigarette. Mitchell sat down next to him. Maybe that's what's happening to you. The same thing happened to me a couple months ago, except for me, I had to relive a torrid love affair with Ann Vandersteel for through 3 whole days in a hotel room. Evans unscrewed his camera from its mount. He reached in his bag and pulled out a dusty laptop. He began to scrub through the footage. Came out perfect. Spicy memes streaking across the chaotic beach as digital soldiers were picked off in the dozens by large shape-shifting creatures. Rad. All of a sudden, a voice shouted, throwing the entire camp into panic. Airstrike! Everyone ran for cover, ducking under large tubs filled with videos of Joe Biden touching young girls, climate change denial flags, and large wooden crates bursting with vaguely anti-Semitic rounds. From behind a tent, Evans watched as a large bomber, flown by Seth Abramson, rained down a 437-thread tweet storm. The digital soldiers watched in horror as the normies wrapped their arms around the tweets and proudly showed them to their friends. In the distance, the shadow bands were spinning rapidly toward the camp. The Donald had become overrun. The last thing Evans saw was Bill Mitchell, holding his phone to his ear, trying to listen to the Your Voice America theme song one last time. However, the signal wasn't great, and it appeared that Mitchell's final pleasure would be plagued by buffering issues. Blackness. The groan of the computer fans woke Evans up from his deep slumber. He glanced around his apartment. His eyes landed on the digital clock display near the bottom of his laptop screen. 3:43 a.m. Shit. It was way too late. He had recorded some weird QAnon podcast at 11 a.m. That was only 6 hours from now. He glanced down at the keyboard. He had dozed off with his hand pressed firmly on the mouse pad. On the screen, www.reddit.com was refreshing over and over and over again. The end.
Just, you've outdone yourself, son. It's beautiful.
I say again, God.